Why, hi there. I'm Ron Juckett, joined by a cast of thousands tonight, and welcome to this DoDCast for the 25th day of January, 2018. Joining me is co-editor Drew Douglas, our minor league expert and editor emeritus Ricky Keeler, and Brian Foley joined us for the first time tonight, and we'll talk with him. But Ricky's on for the reason breaking news within the last hour that the Milwaukee Brewers and Miami Marlins have made a trade. Christian Yelich goes to Miami. It goes to Milwaukee, where he's already popping open cans and bottles of Miller Lite. And the Marlins get a bunch of prospects. And Ricky, tell us briefly about the package that Miami got in return.
I think it's an absolute great haul for the Marlins. Much better than their state, definitely 10 times better than the Stanton haul, and probably about 5 times better than the Ozuna haul. They get a 23-year-old outfielder in Lewis Brinson, who got some major league time last year. Very violent swing, but he can hit for power. He kind of fits that Stanton mold in a way, which I think that's kind of what they were going for here. They asked for reportedly Vlad Guerrero Jr. from Toronto, couldn't get him. Asked for Acuna from Atlanta, couldn't get him. So Brinson's probably the next best choice. In terms of outfielders, they get Isan Diaz, who's one of MLB Pipeline's top 5 second basemen. So it tells you Starlin Castro is probably not for long, although Diaz isn't as advanced in the system, at least as of yet. So that'll be something at least to monitor, maybe how fast Diaz tracks. They got also Monty Harrison. They also got, I think, another pitcher in there. So in the end, Milwaukee, I think, made the right deal. Who knows now if they go get Lorenzo Cain, but they're being aggressive, and, well, Miami's tearing it down.
What are the chances that the Brewers get someone like a Yu Darvish in free agency?
I think it's a good chance. Really, I think the two teams you're competing with, if you're Milwaukee, well, the one team you're competing with, you're Milwaukee's the Cubs. I think really those are the two teams that I think are heavily in on Yu Darvish right now. I don't buy the Dodgers because they really can't spend anything. Don't think Texas wants him back. Don't think the Yankees will do it unless some guy they find to take Ellsbury. Nobody's going to help the Yankees to take on Ellsbury. So I think it's really Cubs and Brewers for Darvish.
All right, and while we have you here, there's speculation that the Nationals are really making an effort to get Real Muto. In your view, because it probably would be prospects, if you're Mike Rizzo, who would you give up for Real Muto?
Well, I just saw John Heyman tweet a second ago that they've been asking the Marlins. Marlins have been asking the Nats for Victor Robles. I don't make that deal. I think Robles is you need your outfielder in case a certain number 34 decides to bolt PC next year. He's the guy that would be that outfielder in waiting. They love his progression. They love what he did last year. I think you have to start with Juan Soto in any kind of package. It makes sense. Soto's a guy not is a couple of years still to go to make his big league debut. Maybe you throw Soto, maybe Keyboom, depending on what the Nats, if they can extend Rendon, then Keyboom really you don't need. His defense is still somewhat of a question. It's short. Maybe you throw a pitcher or two in there, but I think there's got to be a better team that can throw a better offer than the Nats can for Real Muto. But they need a catcher.
Would you move Severino on that deal?
To be honest, I think the Nats might be happy if they could deal Pedro Severino. I think we talked about it a lot last year. I think his stock is down. Roddy Reed is really the guy that people would want, despite his bad defense. The guy can hit. Severino is a good defender, but really couldn't hit much when he came up last year. Couldn't really hit at Syracuse, albeit he had a few injuries. But I don't think you can really make him a centerpiece. He's really like a third, fourth piece throw-in, I would think.
All right. Let's bring in our contributor and our Milwaukee Brewers correspondent. Happens to work that way today. Brian Foley, how are you? And welcome.
Doing well. Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. First time on the DoDCast.
So you live in Milwaukee. What's the reaction going to be to this deal?
I was actually texting my friend right before I hopped on, and he, like a lot of guys in Milwaukee, a lot of fans, they've kind of become a little prospect hoarder mentality recently. They had a couple down years, and so when you're rebuilding, that's kind of like what you're looking at. Like, okay, we're looking at the 2019 season when all these guys that we drafted finally come up. They kind of took a couple steps forward unexpectedly last season to 86 wins. And so now I like the move to get aggressive. I think some of the Brewers fans are a little wary, giving up the guy Brinson, kind of been the kind of like the savior type guy once they move on from Braun and that era of guys. But when you get a guy like Yelich, still young, still under contract, good money, very good player, still can develop, I think that's kind of the right move. in terms, I think it would really help. I think they still need to make another move. I think a guy like Kane, they definitely need pitching. Like right now, Giovanni Gallardo is probably penciled in as like their fifth starter, and that can't be that cannot happen if you want to be a contender. So they still need to make another move to make this move worth it. But it seems like that their GM David Stearns is definitely going to be aggressive going forward. The Brewers kind of been one of the more active teams this offseason, which is all relative, but.
So they really think the Cubs are catchable.
I think so. And even if they don't, I think they think that they can compete with the Cardinals and the Rockies and the Diamondbacks and whoever for the second wild card. They still have a young team, but now with Yelich, they have a really talented outfield with Domingo Santana in right field, Ryan Braun out in left if he can stay healthy for 130, 140 games, which is not a given. So I think they have the offense to compete. Whether they have the pitching, Jimmy Nelson out for the first part of the year with the shoulder surgery. Chase Anderson, we'll see if he can repeat what he did last year. Zach Davies had a nice second half. So they've got some pieces there. They have a good bullpen with Corey Knebel. They've got some pieces definitely to compete. We'll see if they have like how the Brewers were back in the 2010 era when they had Braun at fielder. They had the offense. They didn't always have the pitching. So that kind of seems like what we're back at right now.
Would they pay for you, Darvish?
I was talking. I mean, like the biggest free agent contract they've ever given out in the franchise was that Garza deal a few years back when that was like $52 million. Did not work out at all. So they extended Braun, and that's the biggest like monetary contract they've had. But I don't really see them trying to go 4 or 5 years or however long it's going to take. It's a long term for Darvish. Maybe they can overpay and do like something crazy for like 2 for 55 or 2 for 60 million or something like that. That would be the only way. And I don't know if Darvish is interested in a short-term deal with his injury history. So I'm not sure if that's kind of realistic. They might be looking more at trying to get a cheaper deal for like Lance Lynn, maybe Alex Cobb if they're interested in that. So.
The 25th of January, Drew, and none of these names have gone anywhere. We'll get into that in a little bit. But are you surprised at how strong, Drew, the Brewers have been?
No, I think they, like Brian said, they were kind of unexpectedly a contender last year. And, I mean, the Cubs, maybe it was kind of World Series hangover, but they didn't have the kind of year that they had back in 2016 when they won it all. So I think they definitely think the Cubs are in reach. And with this trade for Yelich, I love the trade kind of from both standpoints, both Miami and Milwaukee. And I think they're really one starting pitcher away. And if they're able to maybe get a Lance Lynn or Alex Cobb or maybe even Darvish or Arrieta if they're willing to take a lower deal, then they could really push the Cubs all the way down to the down into September, and if not win the division, at least get the wild card and get into the postseason.
Ricky, we watched a couple of those Cubs Brewers games together down the stretch. I think the walk off on a Saturday afternoon that drew one of the loudest Santa Marias I think you and I had ever heard from Matt Vasgersian. They're a very good young team. I mean, it wasn't. I mean, they were legitimate last year as a playoff contender. This can only help.
Exactly. By the way, we need more Santa Marias on Sunday Night Baseball. I will have a counter of that. But I think it's a great deal for Milwaukee. I think the big question is if they do get Kane, do they take Domingo Santana and trade him for a pitcher? I think that's always an option. But they're a team looking to win, and I think that's a good sign that their rebuild's gone faster than people thought. Craig Counsell is a really good manager. We've clearly seen that, and really when you St. Louis, even with Ozuna, if he doesn't have enough pitching, and you still have the Cubs that they're still looking for starters. If you could steal Darvish from the Cubs, I mean, that's a great deal because then really what does Chicago have? John Lester's getting old. They probably won't bring back Arrieta. So this is Milwaukee's, I think, prime time to strike.
Absolutely. Ricky, who joined us on very short notice, as in like 5 minutes. Before we let you go, sir, are you going to make a prediction about Real Muto or anything else that we might watch for before we actually get going in about 3 weeks?
I still think Real Muto stays. I know that he's been the one that's maybe been the most vocal, but it's going to be really hard, I think, to find because Yelich, you give your top prospect. I don't know if a team is giving up their number one prospect for Rio Muto. I'm really intrigued by what happens with two guys. Jake Arrieta being one, because he's a big game pitcher, but again, another Boris client. And the other is Mike Moustakas. There's really a team that doesn't need a third baseman. And does he take the 1-year deal and then go back with the Machado Donaldson winter next year, which really won't help him either? So that's the kind of guy that really is stuck without a place to go, because at least Hosmer can go back or go to San Diego and get a lucrative deal. I don't know where Mike Moustakas is getting a lucrative deal from.
That's just – it's going to come like a spigot. Once that dam breaks, once the first one goes, it's going to be just an absolute insane 48 hours. I mean, you got camp. We'll talk about this a little bit later in the show. I mean, we only have 20 days, and there are so many people who are unsigned. It's ridiculous. I mean, you have an all-star team that's practically unsigned.
Yeah, pretty much. You could probably take a team and maybe start like a spring training camp or something with all these guys, and people would come watch it.
The Scott Boras Academy, because they're predominantly his players.
If he might still get what he wants, and Boras always ends up winning more than he loses.
Yes, well, that's why he makes the money, and he's about to have a rather large payday because they're all going to have to sign. I mean, you only got 3 weeks. So you got to know where they're going. All right, Rick, you're welcome to stay, but thanks for coming in on such short notice. As always, we love having you on.
Thanks, guys. Always a pleasure.
All right, so Ricky Keeler, who was our editor emeritus, coming in to join us to talk a little bit about the minor league deal. And it just happens to work out that way that we wanted to introduce our newest writer, or one of our new to you writer anyway, Brian Foley. How are you, Brian?
Doing well. Good
well, it's very nice of you to arrange some local news for you to talk about on your first time on the show.
Worked out quite well. Did not expect that, but
tell the non-existent audience a little bit about yourself.
So from Maryland, Nats fan, but now went to Marquette and stayed out here in Milwaukee. Kind of have not turned my back on the Nationals at all, but I've adopted the Brewers a little bit as my NL Central team, just getting out, coming out for some of their games. And it's when you just look at the Brewers, it's kind of fun that at least some teams this off season are being aggressive, being exciting. When you look at the Giants might not, what they're doing might not work out, but at least it's fun for us to talk about when getting Longoria and McCutchen. Maybe the Brewers overpaid for Yelich, but hey, a lot of fun. And it's much more exciting when you have so many teams that seem like they're trying to rebuild or restructure, look towards the future. It's much. It's kind of like that might be the window of opportunity for these teams that didn't make the playoffs last year, Milwaukee, San Francisco, teams like that, to kind of take that next step. Because if everybody's tanking, then then you're not going to end up where you exactly want to be. So some teams got to win.
There are a lot of things you could give. I know this is probably a tough subject up in Milwaukee. A lot of things you can give Bud Selig grief about for what he did as commissioner.
Mm-hmm.
But the addition of, and I think Drew would agree, the second wild card has just changed the dynamic. So
100%.
Such as the Brewers can do this and contend. And all you got to do is get in. Well, the wild card, yes, you got to win that one game, but it just brings so many teams to the table. And I know it's a sore subject here because of the Nats postseason history, but all you got to do is just get in and you have a chance. And this is one of those things where the Brewers were probably maybe a year or two away going into last year. And now, sure, if Ricky's right and Brian's right, that even if they don't successfully get past the Cubs with the way that the National League East is going to play out, we'll get to that in a couple of minutes, that sure, all you got to do is get in. And my goodness, if you can host that wild card game, all the better. Drew, your thoughts?
I mean, yeah, I really love the second wild card game or second wild card team. I think it gives hope to some teams that like the Brewers, maybe looking up at the Cubs, just coming off the World Series, but have a little bit of hope. And I know, like Brian said, so many teams are tanking right now. And I mean, I don't think it's great for the game with only a few teams actually trying to win now, but it does give hope to some other teams that might be a little borderline coming off of their rebuilds.
And when you look at it, like there's 5 playoff spots in National League. Teams are actually really have a chance to grab those 5 spots, 7 maybe. Like it really doesn't feel like there are too many opportunities. So if you're one of those 7, you might as well be going for it, like the Brewers are. They've got an opportunity now. They've got a young team, and they have the chance to get a good player on a good contract. So teams make sense.
It's a steal of a contract. I forget which one of us did the piece wondering what the Nats would have to give up. But I mean, yeah, I mean, if you were to trade someone of the quality of like a Robles, Yelich would be who you'd go after. I mean, this is really just a quiet guy. Works very hard. Those are the ones that you give up the big prospects for because you could win now. I think it's huge for Milwaukee to do this.
He's kind of like a younger Adam Eaton.
Yes.
Adam Eaton, and a better defender too, so he can hold his own in center field. So really, he fits on any team in baseball. So that's why the Marlins were able to get so much, but that's why the Brewers wanted him so badly.
Absolutely. Well, we only have 16 minutes into the show, and we finally get a chance now to talk about the Nationals. And we usually wing these things every other time that we're doing them. But because we have a new person on Brian, we actually came up with an outline for the show tonight. We never do.
I appreciate it.
And you know what? We blew the first 16 minutes out the window because we had breaking news to film. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the Nats, because this is a Nats show. Holes left to fill is what I have here. And they still need a catcher or a backup catcher and a 5th starter. Those things are not set there. Let's start now, because of the Real Muto things, with the catcher. Do we think, guys, that Real Muto is a real possibility? I mean, Ricky brought up who you'd give away for him. And yes, you have a chance to win a championship, but boy, the price of that is pretty high. Or do they wait to see if someone like Alex Avila's price drops to a reasonable level? Or because of how easy the division is, do you just let things play out? We'll start with Brian.
I think he's a possibility. I think Rizzo's certainly interested. I don't know if I would be interested. Real Muto is good. Is a very solid catcher. I don't know if he is good enough to start giving up even if you're not giving up Robles, but giving up Soto and some of your other higher echelon prospects, especially when you can, I mean, maybe it's not realistic for the learners to do this for a learner ownership, but to go get out and pay for Alex Avila, who is, you probably don't have to, you only have to give up money for him. I mean, and I know that's always been an issue for the Nats, but I don't know if you want to blow out most of your farm system after last offseason, really kind of deplete it for a guy JT Realmuto, who's not going to put you over the top when you're basically guaranteed to be in the postseason.
And so, Drew, it goes to something that you and I have talked about quite a bit. You will know that the Nats, Brian's right, the Nats only have limited resources. Kind of hard to believe, considering that they've already spent over $200 million in payroll for this year. But they don't have eternal resources. Do you hold on to that money and wait for July to see what they need, or do you go out and sign a Holland or a Lynn or trade for a real Muto? What would you do if you were Mike Rizzo right now?
Well, as for Holland, I wouldn't touch him with a 10-foot pole. Just him coming off of the Tommy John, he kind of struggled, especially down the stretch in Colorado. He had a 6-something ERA throughout the second half. He really struggled in the postseason, given that was one game, so it's a small sample size. But just between that and the second half struggles, and he declined that $15 million option, as well as declining the $17.4 million qualifying offer. So presumably he wants more than that, and I just really don't see the Nats giving him that, especially with the solid bullpen already in place. And as for Real Muto, in the catching situation, I'd be perfectly comfortable at least going into the season with Pedro Severino or Rowdy Reed as the backup. I think I'd like to see them address that at the trade deadline if that's what they go with. But I would also love to see Real Muto. And I know Soto is a terrific prospect, but just given the national surplus of outfielders, Harper, we're thinking now he might sign a long-term deal. You got Robles coming up. Eaton signed for the next few years. Taylor is really came to himself last year. I just think there's really not that big of a need for Soto. And if you get Realmuto and you sign Bryce Harper long term, I mean, Realmuto is just now getting into his arbitration year, so he's going to come at least relatively cheap at the beginning of that contract. So I don't know. I don't know if the Nationals do it, but I definitely think it's a possibility.
All right, well, let's talk about something that was on the site earlier today. Would you do it for Michael Fulmer? We'll start with Drew.
Yeah, I mean, Fulmer, he's, I believe, signed for 5 more years, and
Yes.
he's very young. A little bit of an injury history, but nothing too concerning. So, I mean, I would love Michael Fulmer. I'm not sure the Nationals actually do it, but I mean, I guess I could see it with Detroit starting a rebuild, but I don't know. I just don't think that's too realistic at this point.
Well, now the Tigers will have new uniforms because the D on the jersey will now match the D on the cap, which I didn't realize. And one of my best friends is a Tigers fan that the D's didn't match. Now they will. Brian, would that be a trade you'd make? Would you trade Soto and the package for 5 years of Fulmer?
Yes, Fulmer is the type of guy who I'd be more interested in. And we've seen from Rizzo, he's done this kind of in free agency too, where he's not really into going after like those kind of, and even though I just suggested Avila, but those like 10 million or on like 1 year, 10 million, 2 year, 20 million guys he did for Wieters, but he's kind of a big swing guy, go for the big fish. He'd go for Scherzer, go for Worth. He'll trade for like the big guy of the offseason, Eaton. And I think Fulmer, he's out there looking to make a splash. Fulmer would definitely qualify. But coming over from the American League into the National League generally goes well. He's on a good contract. And the Nats would certainly, like, I think another pitcher is more of a need than a catcher upgrade, even though as weak as the catcher position is.
If they can keep Wieters' playing time down, I'm not worried about catcher. I mean, they survived Jose Lobaton. Now, someone will have to learn how to take off helmets. And it's a difficult role to do. But when you're only hitting 154 and the last base runner you stole out was 10 years ago, you can't do any worse than that. But you're kind of hoping against hope that Severino can actually show that he can actually perform at a mentally level. I have concerns, not from my own personal observations, but from what I read, from what Ricky's talked about and others on Twitter, that Roddy Reed is ever going to be good enough defensively to be a regular catcher. His bat probably is there, but I would think that would be one of those players, Drew, that you would eventually see, well, let's shove him at first base because he's, if he can't catch, he can hit. Maybe we can teach him how to play someplace else.
Yeah, I mean, he absolutely raked in the minor leagues. I really liked what I saw from him offensively in his little cup of coffee. And then this winter, I believe he's playing the Mexico or in the Dominican. He's playing somewhere in a winter league, and he was raking there as well. But, yeah, I think maybe we see him move over to first base. I mean, Ryan Zimmerman coming to the end of his contract in the next few years. So maybe that's a possibility for him. But I don't know. Yeah, just from what I've read and the little bit that we saw in the majors, he's not a great defensive catcher.
As far as the starting pitcher is concerned, if they would, if you, it's parades, not prospects. That's what we're looking for. But Fulmer would be kind of like Yelich. I mean, that would be the one who you would make the big deal for. I'm not. I've written about, and I still believe that really those holes are wait and see positions. Let AJ Cole see what he has to offer this spring. Maybe Fetty developed an out pitch since we've seen him last. You saw Tommy Malone last year. I mean, Brian, do you think there's anything salvageable there?
No, he's done. He's been done for a couple of years. I don't think he has a realistic shot to help them at all, other than just like they need to throw a single body on the mound if it gets that bad with injuries. But
Edwin Jackson is depth, but he's not getting a playoff game. I really think that they've put as much pressure as they can on AJ Cole. And as I wrote at the time, I believe Cole is probably the closest to Michael A. Taylor as far as, look, this is your last chance. If you can't make it as a fifth starter with a wide open position, then maybe starting pitcher is not what you're going to be for. But I think if they're going to spend maybe $15-20 million more between now and August, personally, I'd rather hold on to that. I understand that everyone's excited about this or that, and if they can make a trade, fine. And we all know that they're taking another Boris client on at some point. It's just inevitable. It's how we got Matt Waiters. I'd hold on to it until you know what you need. But there's a lot of pressure, as you both know, for this team to be successful this year. But that really comes in October. And I really don't know, as far as the other aspect of the Yelich trade, whatever chances Miami had went from 0.1 to 0.01 of being competitive. I mean, how much are we really going to learn in the regular season, guys?
I mean, not much. So, like, I guess if you're talking about the Fulmer trade, it's or like a hypothetical. It's kind of like there's no reason to do it now because he's not going to help you in the regular season. The Nats are gonna win that by double-digit games most likely.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second because we have breaking news.
Ooh, there we go.
From the Milwaukee Brewers, have signed Lorenzo Cain.
Wow, see, I like that. I mean, Santana's gone.
You heard me clacking earlier, and that was to thank Ricky for being on with us. And so so that's from Ricky, who I trust dearly with sources. So the Brewers have reshaped their outfield with Lorenzo Cain and Christian Yelich today. So let's go back and talk a little bit about what that will mean for the Brewers real quick, Brian.
Well, that likely means, and there are rumors that Domingo Santana could be traded for a starting pitcher. And so now it seems like a guarantee, and I doubt they're going to be able to move Braun for what they want. That'd be more salary relief, if anything. But now if Santana's on the market, maybe and he hit 30 home runs last year. Good, patient hitter. He's young. Hit about 270, 280. Was a very solid player all year long. Probably their most consistent hitter. That might open the door to potentially trade, and he's like the centerpiece of potentially a trade for Chris Archer down in Tampa. So that could be maybe the centerpiece of a deal for that. And if they get Chris Archer, then then that puts more pressure on the Cubs. They really feel like they probably have to go out and get someone like Darvish to try and keep the Brewers at bay.
I have no details on it on the deal. Ken Rosenthal is the one that tweeted it. Terms are not yet known. I'm reading this right from MLB Trade Rumors. If he passes the physical, he'll join Yelich. And hello to Judo Joker. What do we figure the money will be for that? And that pretty much takes Darvish off the table if they sign Cain, right?
Probably, yeah. I would think so. They have not shelled out too many contracts in Mark Atanasio's days as the owner. So, but it means they have to trade an outfielder because.
Right. Drew, your thoughts on poor Seth not here. Seth Brian Foley, by the way, Judo is the guy that you don't know before. He's been with us since you've been with us since what, October?
Me? Since July, I think. July.
Wow. Don't you think I show great respect for our writers on the site if I don't remember how long they've been there for? So you've probably read some of Brian's stuff, but as we get closer to the season, we have a full bevy of contributors to join Drew and myself. You missed Ricky being on here, Judo, with the whole the news earlier on the Yelich trade. And so Brian will be with us from time to time, along with some of our other good contributors. Drew, your thoughts on the Milwaukee Brewers' amazing hour and a half?
I mean, yeah, it's a big hour and a half for the Brew Crew. I love Lorenzo Cain. I know there were some concerns about how he would age because he is already in his 30s, but I mean, he's one of the best defensive center fielders in the league. I think signing him now, you push Yelich to left, at least for now. Maybe as Cain ages a little bit, then you switch him. But I mean, I don't know. I think the outfield is great, assuming Santana is traded, of Braun, Cain, and Yelich. I love the idea that Brian pointed out, where maybe Santana goes to Tampa Bay for Chris Archer, and I think the Brewers have done a lot, obviously, to help themselves tonight.
Ricky tells me 5 years, $80 million.
Whoa! Really?
Yeah,
5 years.
For
Lorenzo Cain. Oh my God!
Cain, yeah.
Oh, I was expecting like a 2 or 3 year deal. I did not expect anybody to be getting 5-year deals at this point of free agency. Wow.
And he's already 31, so that's through age 36, 37.
That's a long time. That's a long time. And we were kind of wondering if we were done with the big long-term deals for players over 30. But, you figure, as we talked about a few minutes ago, guys, you have a shot. You take the shot. You have to do what you have to do. And, okay, so if you overpay for Lorenzo Cain in years 4 and 5, you might have bratwursts and parades in Milwaukee, or at least a reason to invite Aaron Rodgers down, since the Packers haven't played in Milwaukee since the mid-90s.
Right.
So that's good. What were we talking about before?
Fulmer.
Yeah,
no, just something else I wanted to point out with Fulmer too, or any starting pitcher the Nets get, especially Fulmer, because he's so young. He would be an enormous asset moving forward, because I love the national starting rotation right now, but I mean, Scherzer's aging. Gio and Roark could both be gone in the next couple of years. Strasburg never seems to be able to stay healthy. And then you look to the Nationals minor leagues. I mean, they got Eric Fedde, who we talked about earlier, Will Crow they just drafted, Seth Romero they just drafted. But, I mean, I think Fulmer could really be their ace for years to come if they were able to acquire him. And I'm not sure how many of the Nationals' current starters will really be playing a huge role in the next 3-4 years.
Yeah, I was laughing at someone was tweeting Bernie Brewer sliding into the beer cup. All this news going on. All right, so that's enough of the Brewers talk for the evening. We're talking about Fulmer and that. I wanted to talk a little bit about now the National League East. Not that we thought that the Marlins were contending before, but there was a conversation between some of the regulars that watched the show and us about what the Marlins were going to do, and I knew the Marlins were going to be historically bad. But do you see any I hate to call things before we even get to training camp, but is there any reasonable, plausible way the Nats don't make the playoffs?
Maybe the Phillies take that like huge step, or the Mets stay perfectly healthy and everyone on their offense has a career year. I mean, I don't see the Braves or Marlins really having much of a shot. It would be a massive disappointment if they miss the playoffs.
Drew?
Yeah, I don't really see any way for the Nationals to miss the postseason. I think they win the division by double-digit games, and if Bryce Harper, Max Scherzer, Steven Strasburg, all their top players get hurt, I think they still win the division. It just might not be by 15 games.
We had 12 on the disabled list in August last year, out of 40.
and they still won by 20 games or something like that.
And then they won by 20. I mean, Fangraphs, whose projections are as conservative as the Federal Reserve Bank, has them winning by 12 games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they only had them at 92 wins, I believe.
Well, they had them at 92 last year and beating the Mets by 1. We know how that went. Judo says the Phillies could pull off a Yankee type run next year. I think next year, you're right. I think that the Phillies are going to be players in the free agent market. They have all this money to spend. But that doesn't preclude them for if Yu Darvish wants the most money, I could see the Phillies going, here's a blank check, fill it out. But that really is the only monkey wrench I can see. I don't think the Braves are as good as they were last year. And the Mets just seem to be on the verge of complete and utter dysfunction. I mean, you had Jeff Wilpon going into the press and talking about the way he talked about understanding the fans thing, but they have a plan and all this. I just can't see the Mets contending or spending any money.
But they've signed Jay Bruce, Adrian Gonzalez. I think they've re-signed Reyes today.
Right.
Somebody else. So that like those are not names that strike any fear in the Nationals' heart or anybody in the NL East really. So
I mean, Bruce is intriguing, but
go ahead.
But
but if he's your best player,
right? No, exactly. If he's your best hitter, I mean, Gonzalez could even make the Dodgers postseason roster for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Judo says, kind of sad to see such a great pitchers get run in the ground by the Mets. It's not the first time it happened. Not the first time at all. What did Reyes get for a deal? I did not see that.
I do not know. I'm not
$1
sure.
year,
1 year.
1 year and how much?
$3 million.
Wow.
I don't know. And it said they're still looking to acquire a second baseman. So I don't know. I guess we'll keep an eye on that.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I talked about the Nationals holes. Was there anything else you guys wanted to add about that? I know I cut that off. I mean, Drew, do you think that they, outside of the Boris move that we'll kind of grumble about when that happens, do they kind of stand pat, or do they do something between now and Valentine's Day?
I think they do something just because it seems like that's Mike Rizzo's nature, and there are so many Boris clients still out on the market. But I'm perfectly fine with them going into the season as the roster currently stands.
Brian?
Me too. I say no reason to go out and get anybody unless there's a catastrophic injury, like Strasburg's out for the year, Wieters and whoever the backup catcher is, start just hitting even worse than last season. No reason to rock the boat right now and blow up what you have left in your farm system.
Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit about Howie Kendrick. That was, I don't believe he might have signed the last time that Drew and I were on with you. Along with Matt Adams, another one of those perfect bench pieces that's versatile and a very good. He wanted to be there, which says a lot. In fact, of the 12 free agents that the Nats had going into at the end of last year, the only one that's left is Jose Lobaton. Now, I'm not expecting Jason Worth to come back, but it really is a big deal, Drew, for Howie Kendrick to come back.
Yeah, I think it's huge, especially with Daniel Murphy probably not being ready for opening day. Then maybe see Kendrick and Wilmer Defoe kind of platoon a little bit at second base before Murphy's able to come back. But just with all the injuries the Nationals had last year and in years past, I think Kendrick's versatility and veteran presence will be a huge asset off the bench.
Ryan?
Yeah, my one very small concern coming into this, after the 2017 season, was that the Nats bench would not be as good, but their pickups and re-signing Kendrick and getting Matt Adams to basically be Adam Lynn 2.0, I've been very impressed with. And so now that they're going in with a bench of Kendrick, Adams, Goodwin, and Defoe, like that's one of the better benches in the National League. And if there's any injuries, you feel fairly confident that those guys can definitely take over for a couple weeks, a month at a time.
How much pressure is there on Defoe going into this year now?
I think there's some pressure because especially with Murphy's a free agent. So then like Nats and the Nats fans want to see that he is maybe can be the future at that position. It's not, he's not the only answer there, and Murphy will come back eventually, hopefully. But I would say that there's a little pressure in the short term, at least to start.
Drew?
Yeah, I would think any pressure for Defoe would come from the fact that Murphy's contract expires after this season, and Defoe is potentially a second baseman in the future. But the one thing I want to see Defoe improve on, and I think he's a great electric young player, but he just has to perform better if he's not getting regular at-bats, because right now there's not a place for him to start, assuming everyone is healthy. And it seems like he only is very productive if he is in the lineup most days. So I'd like to see him be a little bit of a better bench player this year.
He has to. He has to embrace that super utility role. I mean, for me, the re-signing of Kendrick was kind of a shot across the bow to Defoe for, look, if you're not going to perform when we expect you to perform, we're going to bring we brought someone else in who can fill your role. You know, I think I don't think that it happens, but it does kind of leave in the back of your mind that they might not be as high on Defoe as they thought. Not that
I think they're high on Defoe as the future second baseman, but probably not very high on him as the backup for now, just because he struggles if he doesn't receive regular at-bats.
Right. All right. Yesterday, the baseball writers announced who they were putting in the Hall of Fame, and it's a class of 6 if you consider Jack Morris and Alan Trammell from the Detroit Tigers. If you don't know who was voted in, Chipper Jones, Jim Tomei, Vladimir Guerrero, and Trevor Hoffman. All deserving, don't you think?
I think so.
Yep.
I personally didn't vote for Hoffman, but for the internet writers, we put in 6. We had already put in Guerrero last year's and Edgar Martinez. Hoffman got in. Chipper, Tomei, and they also voted for Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens. So let's start with the exclusions. You got to think that Edgar Martinez gets in next year, right?
Yes, I kind of expect him to get the Tim Raines bump in the final season, where Raines in that 10th year kind of soared past the 75% marks, and feels like Martinez is right there knocking on the door, and he'll get in.
Thoughts, Drew, on Guerrero going in as the first Angel as opposed to an Expo?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I would have liked to see him go in as an Expo just because that is part of the Nationals franchise, but I was really too young to know too much of what he did between the Expos and the Angels. I remember I've seen videos of him just hitting home runs and like pitches in the dirt, pitches up at his eyes. I know he's a great player. I know now there's only a few teams left, with the Nationals being one of them, to not have any players in the Hall of Fame wearing their hats. So maybe it's something to keep an eye on in the next 20 years or so.
I got to think that Scherzer will go in as a Nat.
I think so. I think, yeah, he will. I think he's a lock for the Hall of Fame, and I would hope he goes in as a Nat.
You know, unless he somehow wins that World Series elsewhere or whatever. I think most people will associate him with the Nat. I think it's tough for Guerrero. I mean, if Guerrero, I think, was right to do it with the Angels. It's tough because the Expos really don't exist anymore. We didn't write anything on it because if anytime we mention the words Montreal and Expo together, a lot of you don't like it. But here's a funny fact. I'm supposed to at some point do a slideshow on the 10 best hitters in Nats history. Now I'm going to go by OPS. And so Bryce Harper fits that. Surprise, surprise. He has a 907 OPS going into the season. But he's second in franchise history behind one Vladimir Guerrero, whose OPS in his 8 years in Montreal, guys, was 978. Think about how good Bryce Harper is with the Nats. And then is absolutely blown away by what Guerrero did in 8 years. Now, different city, different surface, all that, but still, that's wow. You need to wait 2 years.
Yeah, that's absurd. I really wish maybe Vlad could come and play for the Nats now, and if you see kind of what he did back in Montreal, but with the Nationals.
Judo thinks that Scherzer goes in as a Nat for sure. I mean, I would agree with that. They'll happen. I mean, this franchise is only. I mean, look, who are the other teams? Tampa, who's been around longer.
Miami.
Well, they can play. I mean, they've had the Hall of Fame players there, but they can't keep anybody. Who else?
I think there was one more. I can't think of them off the top of my head.
Oh, Texas.
Yeah, Texas.
Yeah, I think Ryan went in as an Astro. But yeah, so it'll happen. It'll happen. Thoughts on you guys only know Clemens and Boggs as Clemens and Bonds, not Boggs, as what you heard from the steroid parts of their career. What are your thoughts on them getting in?
I think they do belong in the Hall of Fame just because they are two of the greatest players of all time. I'm not sure that they will get in. I think they've kind of peaked right now in like 55% around there. But, I mean, there's so many guys that people think might have been using steroids. And I know the case is very strong that Clemens and Bonds were using steroids. But I don't know. I just think if you just forever just, he's probably using roids, and it's kind of judgmental on if they were using roids or not. Like, I hate that they cheated, but I personally would put them in the Hall of Fame.
Brian, you're our numbers guru.
I don't really have like a hot take on it. I wouldn't vote for them. They cheated, and I know some guys have the kind of the steroid taint on them, and they still got in, like Bagwell and Pudge Rodriguez, and Piazza, but those were much less definitive cases. I don't begrudge people who vote them in because it is the Hall of Fame, that they were some of the most famous players that we've ever had in the sport. Some of the most dominant players, probably the most dominant players in Bond's case. But I would not have voted them in.
As someone who watched a lot of Roger Clemens, or listened to, because this was kind of in the days of pre-cable in New England, or at least in the parts that I lived in, someone who watched and listened to a lot of Roger Clemens starts over the years before he moved on, Fat Roger was just as good as In Shape Roger. And you can't tell me. I mean, in the 24-4 in '86, that came out of nowhere. Yeah, they did it without the stuff, and I do believe Bonds that he sat and watched the infamous interview on SportsCenter with McGuire and Leandro in his locker at Old Shea Stadium, and said, "Well, if he's doing it, why can't I?" But I'll be a hypocrite. There's no way in hell I'd ever vote for Sammy Sosa, Manny Ramirez, or Rafael Palmeiro, who kind of perjured himself in front of Congress. So, for me, I guess it really is kind of a case-by-case basis. I think what would help, I voted for both Clemens and Bonds in the internet election. I think what will help with these cases is someone in the hall going, "Yep, I juiced," and not Pud Galvin. Someone else so that people would know. I'm not going to speculate any further on that, but if Joe Schmo said, "Yeah, I used," you gonna throw him out of the Hall of Fame? No. All right, was there anything else? Let me see. The last line, guys, was thoughts on the slow MLB offseason. That kind of changed tonight. And I haven't seen the John Boy's video on Barry Bonds. What do we think? We talked a little bit about the Nats probably will make a move before we get to training camp or spring training. Now that the door has opened a little bit, what do you guys expect now in the next 3 weeks? Do you want to go on record? There's no such thing as a wrong prediction of where Darvish goes. Any other big deals that where do you think the top people land? Drew?
I don't know. I think Alex Cobb goes to the Cubs. It's reportedly close. I think it's like a month and a half ago, but he just has a lot of connections. He's with the Rays. Joe Madden used to be there. They got the Cubs recently signed his old pitching coach. Forget his name, Jim Hickey or something like that. Someone
pitched for the Orioles.
Mm-hmm.
I have his worthless baseball card because they made 10 million of them in 1989.
So, I think Alex Cobb is about as sure of bet as any of these free agents, in my opinion, to go to the Cubs.
Brian, you got anything?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about sure bets, I think JD Martinez to Boston. My friend who I was texting the other day, he said that JD Martinez and the Red Sox are kind of like every rom-com you've ever watched. They're gonna end up together, but it's taken way longer than you feel like it should. It doesn't. I mean, there's no one else out there for Martinez. Maybe Arizona, but it doesn't seem like they're really pushing too hard. There's been rumors of like a 5-year deal for Martinez that's been offered by Boston. Not sure how true that is, but feels like now that the floodgates are starting to open with Kane and Yelich and whatever the Brewers are doing, the Cubs are going to get in on something soon. Feels like the rest of the league has to finally start making some moves, and Martinez to Boston makes the most sense.
So Boston and Martinez are the Jim and Pam and Ross and Rachel of this winter.
Yes, totally.
I like that idea a lot. I think the Orioles, I'm going to do an actual hot take. I think the Orioles trade Machado before the season.
I hope not.
I know why you guys hope not, but
yeah.
But I think that someone will make an offer that Baltimore can't refuse, such as taking the money.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Masson introduced their preseason schedule today. Drew and I haven't had a chance to talk about this yet, but they're doing 7 games, all from West Palm Beach. So get ready to see a lot of the Marlins in Houston and St. Louis. 2 games in prime time, March 13th against the Mets and March 23rd against the Astros. And those 2 nights, the 13th and the 23rd, will be our first live postgame shows of the year. We won't do them after. We're only going to live tweet television games this year. You guys went around last year for that part, trying to live tweet the Cardinal Nats games when the Cardinals were using their 5th string announcers from the Memphis PR department team. I can't tell you how exciting that was.
Yeah, is that where you get minor league guy at the plate?
It wasn't just the minor league; it was minor league announcers too, and it wasn't even good minor league announcers. It was like coaches, the 18th, assistant bench strength coach and popcorn vendor. I guess we'll be calling the 4 through 6 innings today in St. Louis in Jupiter. Yeah. That guy struck out. Well, who's that guy? I don't know. Number 97. So we're only going to live tweet television games anyway, and that includes whatever road teams pick them up. So there'll be some Houston games, I'm sure, in there as well. But those will be the first 2 live post-game shows. We're going to do them after the 2 night games of the 13th against the Mets and the 23rd, which is a 6 o'clock game on Masson, 5 o'clock Central, for those of you that care. Against Houston. Who hosts those? We weren't not sure yet, but that will be. So we're getting close. So they're doing 7 games, and they're not leaving West Palm Beach. They're not even going to Jupiter, Drew.
Yeah. I don't blame them.
7 miles. They're not going to 15 minutes to Jupiter.
Yeah. I'm not sure how many people actually watch those games on Madison, so probably don't want to have to move all the equipment and get everything set up for 100 people to watch.
That's true. People will watch the first 3 or 4 innings as long as the regulars are in there. Mm-hmm. But when Bob and FP are going, who's that? Number 27A is now pitching. But hey, it's baseball. All right. So I'd like to thank Brian for being on with us. Brian, how can people follow you?
I'm on Twitter at Brian with an I, Brian D. Foley.
Oh, okay.
Very simple.
Very, very simple. I'm at Ron Juckett and Drew.
At DrewRD98. All
right. Website, districtondeck.com. Twitter, District on Deck. And Facebook, really, we need you on Facebook too, District on Deck. We will not be with you next week because we have a prior obligation, but then I think that's it. I think we'll be with you at least weekly, if not daily, through what we hope is a long October. Mm-hmm. Rest up, guys. It's coming soon. So for Brian Foley, Drew Douglas, and the rest of the staff, we'll have someone else on the next time that we're with you. I'm Ron Juckett. Have yourselves a good time, and we'll talk to you the next time.